word that trouble was coming.
The white folks are killing the colored.
Barbaric violence was committed against Black people across this country.
Kerosene was dropped from an airplane.
Why did nobody ever teach us this? Because they didn't want you to know.
When it was an opportunity to wipe out a community, they took it.
I cannot imagine that there are mass graves somewhere in our community and we didn't try to find them.
They're buried somewhere, and the question is where?
We have encountered human remains.
It was like they had found people who had been disappeared by history. The earth had unleashed the truth.
We view this as a murder investigation.
I'm gonna raise my voice.
Some people say that city officials orchestrated a cover-up. It wasn't a movie. It wasn't a chapter in a book. It happened to real people.
They burned the whole town down. But it will rise again.
Hi, my name is Gil Robertson, president of the African American Film Critics Association. Today, we are talking to the amazingly gifted Dawn Porter about her documentary on the Tulsa burning Red Summer. We've just followed a 100-year anniversary of that event, and so this documentary is definitely must-see television. We're going to move things forward by kicking it over to Katia Woods, our facilitator in Philadelphia. We also have Carolyn Hines in Toronto on the call, Nancy Green in Los Angeles, Dana Abercrombie in New York, Rhonda Rasha Penrice in Atlanta, and Bonnie DeSong in Chicago. Ladies, I'm going to let you do what you do so well. Have fun with all the students today. I'll see you on the other side.
My name is Porter, Katia Woods, Couple Social. Your work seems to be always coming out when there are things going on in our country. And I think that's a good thing that needs support in terms of moving the conversation forward. Right now, we're having a lot of chit chat about critical race theory, about who gets to teach what, and about whom. Do you find that one of the reasons that we have your work is so important is to counteract that type of discussion where folks are like, why do we need to learn this? Because it seems to me with this particular piece of work, there were people, Black people in Tulsa, Oklahoma that did not know about this. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. And first, thank you all so much for being here and really for always being supportive, not only of my work, but for all the other makers of color. We rely on you, we appreciate you, and it's very heartwarming to me to see you all gathered as a collective. So I just want to express that sincere appreciation to Mr. Gill, but to all of you Black women for holding us up, because we definitely need it. And I'm making myself cry before I even start any conversation. There is this mythology that the racism that we see today is somehow different from the past, and that it has sprung up because of, insert the false claim. And so one of the things that I'm very interested in, as are the other makers of color, Stanley Nelson, and the other Black people that are making films, particularly about this topic, about Red Summer and about Tulsa. And I do want to strongly shout out all of the makers who are writing about and making films about this topic, because we need all of these stories. There's not one person to tell this story. It's too big, it's too important. But I do think that, by showing rather than telling, we can help to counteract and educate. And you know what? There are going to be folks who this story is completely new, and I count myself in that group, and I've been making films about civil rights for the last 10 years. I didn't know. I had, the Smithsonian has an exhibit, the African American Museum. I say it like there's only one Smithsonian. The African American Museum of History and Culture has an exhibit, and I had done 4 short films, and one of them was about Tulsa footage. So I knew something about the Tulsa massacre. What I didn't know was the extent of the Red Summer. And that is one way in which, that is something I think my piece if you take as a whole all the other films that are coming out, and that's why I always say watch them all. But I think what I'm trying to add is it wasn't just Tulsa. Tulsa actually there's a very active community in Tulsa that has been pushing the story forward. And then we have to credit Regina King and Watchmen for putting that narrative fictional film based on a true story, made this massacre, this deadly time in history, like it even made people think that it could actually happen. It's interesting that it took fiction work to make that, to introduce that. But yes, to your question, we are doomed to repeat our history. We see repetitions in the history, and I'm very interested in tracing back the roots of today's current racism and discrimination, taking it all the way back and continuing to remind. And it's not to wallow in the past and pain, it is to interrupt that cycle and keep exploring. So I'm trying to add my voice to that interruption.
Thank you so much.
Hi, good morning, Donna. It's Carolyn Forrest, Here's What Happened podcast and Carolyn Talks. One thing I really find interesting about documentaries is how documentarians and the researchers are able to bring multiple storylines together and center all of them around one topic. Like for this one, it's the Tulsa massacre, but you bring in other events that took place not only during the Red Summer but before and after, like for instance the LA riots. So could you just tell me a bit about including those specific events, and I guess you could say extrapolating the events and how everything kind of coalesces, and because it talks about racism, but it also does talk about how these things do affect the people that grew up in these communities. Like one of the people in the film says, like the ground is drenched in trauma. Like there's that trauma, but also for you as a filmmaker, just exploring all of this and protecting yourself emotionally and mentally while doing all of this research.
Usually I'm able to, so one thing I want to say about this project is, while first of all, I think the context was super important to understand. We only covered 5 of the massacres. There were more than 25 in the Red Summer. Some people think there were more than 50. So the historians are disagreed on that. And I think once you pull that back and think there was a targeted campaign of violence against Black people in this concentrated period. And that's important to understand. Tulsa was not an anomaly. It was part of a series of events that was literally targeted to destroy Black people's progress and to basically keep them enslaved. I mean, that's what we're talking about. So you can't understand that if you only know the Tulsa story. You also have to start to look at the other stories. But then the flip side of that, for this particular project, what I came away with was this sense of relief and pride. Because if you think of what people had accomplished, what Black people had accomplished between slavery and the time of the massacres, which is 1917. Actually, some of them happened as early as 1907. So from 1865 to 1917, there was so much progress that white people were afraid and had to have this massive pushback. We are seeing that cycle again. We are in another step of progress for people. Although we have so many people struggling, we also have many more people succeeding. And you see that massive pushback once again. You see it in voting rights, trying to disenfranchise Black people. You see it in affirmative action attacks, trying to cut off educational opportunities. You see it. And so getting that big picture is so important for us. We can't attack an enemy we can't really see or understand. And So that's why I think like that context is important. But the other piece of that I came away with is look at what people accomplished in those few decades to come from not being able to like read or write legally, let alone move, to going to, and not just the people who were very wealthy. There's always going to be a few outliers who are very, very wealthy. The majority of people in Tulsa and Elaine and all the other cities were not very wealthy people, but they were successful. They were successful in they had intact families. They had churches, they had schools, they had joy, they had leisure time. Leisure time is a measure of success because you don't always have to work just to keep yourself alive. And the idea that that success of just having a comfortable, calm life is too challenging to white supremacy, that to me is very interesting. So, but I did come away with such a sense of pride in the resilience and success, creativity of all of these people. So I really focused on that and thinking we have to flip the narrative. The narrative is we were attacked not because we're weak, we were attacked because we were strong. And if you think about that, it just makes you feel like that's who I come from. That's my history. So I hope that this will also be empowering for Black people.
Oh, for sure. Thank you so much for putting yourself in the position and making yourself vulnerable to explore all of this story.
Hi, I'm Bonnie DeShong. I'm the host of Bonnie's Eye on the FM Omni Channel 95.1 Chicago. And I also am a contributing journalist for the Chicago Crusader and ChicagoNow.com. When I watched the film, Dawn, I was struck from beginning to tears in the end because I didn't know about the Red Summer. I didn't even know about the 1919 riot in Chicago, 1928, was it? The riot in Chicago. So from the beginning, when the person said that we are walking on the grounds where, these things happened, all the way to the commission in Chicago, it was just amazing to me. But my question is, when you interviewed the white people who were alive when the Tulsa and the riots were going on versus interviewing the Black people, what was that kind of interaction? What were their thoughts? Was it different than the viewpoint of the Black participant?
So I didn't interview anyone who was alive at the time, but very few people are still alive. But I did interview, for example, Mayor Bynum, the mayor of Tulsa. And it's a complicated story. He has relatives who were mayors and in position of power during the Tulsa massacre. And he had not heard about the massacre until he was well into his teens. And so here he has relatives who, what he said was that his relatives sheltered people who were fleeing violence. And I take him at his word. That is what his relatives have said. But I also think you have to you don't need to hold a gun to somebody's head to participate in oppression. If you are part of a system that maintains segregation and denies opportunity, you are also a participant. And so I think for Mayor Bynum, who's white, and for white Tulsans, I see his struggle. I see him wanting to acknowledge and doing a brave thing and acknowledging the truth. But I think that there is more reckoning to happen. And I think until white people can face with bravery the truth about circumstance, we are not going to be able to have the progress that we need. So I think part of this is just telling the truth. And that's one of the things that's so important for me, is that this be rigorously researched and documented. The facts are there if you ask the question. It's just somebody needed to ask the question.
Thank you.
Hello, Dana Abercrombie from the Coalition. This was just speechless. Literally, there are no words to fully express what I felt when I was watching it. So I wanted to focus a little bit on what was the process like, because I know that you covered 5 out of the 25 massacres that we know of, and you also had the ability where you focused on what was going now to show that this is a cyclical thing. This is not something of the past. This is something that's, it happens in cycles. So was the goal to always focus on the cyclical, or was it to showcase what has happened to us as a people throughout the years, and it just so happened to be the cyclical?
One of the great joys of working with Deneen Brown, who is a phenomenal reporter, is she had done so much research and had such a holistic understanding of the time period in history that it was a rapid shortcut for me. She and I kind of downloaded. Deneen started on the project with us as a consultant. And because I come out of a journalism background, it was very important to me. And also because we need to tell our facts right. The facts as they are astounding enough. And I think it's important to not embellish them. They need no embellishment, but I think it's really important to be able to point to a document and say, here's exactly what happened in the words of the people who were there. And so Deneen provided that kind of safety net of we could double, triple check every fact that we were going to allege. But then in talking to her, I thought, here is a woman who is a native of Oklahoma, not of Tulsa, but of Oklahoma, who is a reporter. She's traveling and uncovering truth. And she's like literally walking in the steps of Ida Wells. And I couldn't not put her on camera because there is an emotion that she brings to this story because it is where her people are from that I think enriches the story. So once Deneen got involved, that is where the cycle, the cyclical nature started to really develop. And then we had, the occasion of the current dig to bring it into the present. And so the digging is almost a metaphor, right? It's unearthing this truth. And I think somebody says like the earth had revealed its truth. It just needed that spark. It needed, it needed all of us. It needed the people of Tulsa. The Black people of Tulsa have been pushing for this for decades. They would not let this story die. And that's, the Black press is part of that. So bringing in all of like what it takes to tell this story, to give credit and shine a light on all of the ways that this happened, like that was what I was really interested in. And then it was interesting that it was grounded in Blackness, those efforts. And so we have Deneen, we have Phoebe Stubblefield, whose relatives are also from Oklahoma. She's the head archaeologist on this story. So, but then once we started getting into the past and seeing not only Tulsa but the other 4 cities, the parallels to today were just so stunning. I mean, when you see the people climbing, the jail, it looks like January 6th. I didn't have to say that. You all saw it for yourselves. And that's the beauty of film, is we can fill in our contemporary story. I don't have to be so on the nose with that. Like, you all could fill that in. And that, by not having January 6th, which would have interrupted the story, by the way, it allows us to focus on what happened in the 1920s. Because we already have, a contemporary audience already has that information. So, the one exception to that is I could not help but have the Karen sequence, we call it, because that comes from somewhere. It isn't an accident that the white lady in the park starts to have her voice get high and starts to get hysterical on the phone, and she tells him that she's going to say that an African American man is threatening her when she knows that that's not happening. That weaponizing of whiteness is a historical fact that has killed Black men and Black people for 100 years. And I wanted to explicitly, in case anybody missed it, want to make that point.
Thank you so much.
Hi, Nancy Green with Film Critique. And first of all, I want to thank you so much for making this movie. You know, I knew about a lot of these, but I didn't know about all of them. And I feel like this information is so important, like everybody has said. And I wanted to know what are some things that this movie has contributed to in terms of things like reparations or bringing the information to authorities who can do something in terms of compensating or the families or bringing it to an additionally wider audience. Things like the Tulsa massacre, we're seeing people are getting reparations. So I wanted to know if the documentary has contributed somewhat to that when you were working on it.
The argument for reparations, there have been many forms of that argument. One is that all Black people have suffered a loss, and those arguments have not really gone anywhere. They kind of like people put them out and they go into the air. I am very hopeful that when you look at Tulsa, you see itemized lists of lost possessions. I'm not talking about hurt feelings or anxiety or something that's difficult to measure. There's itemized lists of lost possessions, land, and valuables. And so it seems to me that, and those claims were denied by the white-owned insurance companies as the riot was thought of as an act of God. So it seems to me that it's going to get increasingly difficult to deny that reparations are deserved for particularly those Tulsa victims, and then I think we can move on from there. But we need to have that reckoning and that acknowledgement. And I feel very strongly now, and I did not always feel this way. I was formerly of the camp that we shouldn't, as Black people, focus on reparations. We have so many things to do right now. Let's focus on things that we can accomplish. I'm a former lawyer. I'm a practical person. I like to get things done. I don't like to put my energy out into the air. But seeing those lists, I mean, she was like furniture, silverware, jewelry, paintings, photographs. I don't know how you don't pay those people back and at least start there. And I think once that happens, that's going to make a shift in this argument, because it's going to unequivocally mean people are taking responsibility and facing up to what happened. And that's what needs to happen. So there have been, the call for reparations, particularly in Tulsa, is more advanced than in some other places. But I don't think those calls are going to stop anytime soon. And I hope that this film does contribute to those efforts, because I think it is deserved and needed. It's not about the money. It's about the acknowledgement at this point.
Great, thank you. And yes, I feel like, especially with those itemized lists, like you just said, that's very much like the Holocaust, where they have lists of all of these items that family members lost that can be recovered, and money and land and things like that. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, Don. Karan from Karanism.com. I am curious about the art. I want to know more about this story. Was told in such a profound way, and such a huge character in this narrative is the images. What was it like to source this kind of history that was documented during the time of the Tulsa Massacre and the Red Summer? Because the images were remarkable.
Thank you for that. It's one of the things I love the most about my job is this ability to see these images from the past. Black people have such a rich and beautiful history, and we're just at the tip of the iceberg in expressing it and exploring it. And I think about my two children. I have a 19-year-old and a 17-year-old, two boys. And I literally thought about them with every image, the tough ones, but also the beautiful ones. So you will see a male soldier holding his daughter in the 1920s. That's an image that we need to see, that we have had Black men who are not only strong, but loving, right? So we had two wonderful archivists, and we knew the Tulsa. So if you think about the time period, one of the challenges of this film is that the moving image didn't really begin until the 1920s. So the Tulsa footage is some of the earliest footage we have in American cinema. Before that time, we do not have moving, it wasn't invented. And so how do you tell a story where there isn't footage? And so that's where the archival from, the still pictures, when you do this work, you will see, and I have seen over and over, Black people since slavery times have always been documenting their lives. And they document their lives and you see this, and my grandmother used to do this. There were my grandparents grew up in Harlem. There were these Black photographers that you might be a maid or a janitor or whatever you were in your job, but on Sunday, you were the church usher and you were also how you wanted to be seen. And so photography was very, very important to the community. It was this reflection of who we are inside. And so people were dressed up. And I really particularly am moved by the images of the soldiers in their uniforms. There was so much pride in wearing that uniform. So I wanted to show those images to show strength and to show full personhood. And so we really leaned into looking for those images in each of the cities. There's also stories like the story of Scipio Jones, the lawyer who defended the Elaine folks. Scipio Jones, in his tie with his pocket watch and he took that argument to the Supreme Court of the United States. That is an important story to understand. That was groundbreaking law. They required him to work with an NAACP lawyer and a white lawyer because of racism, but it was Scipio Jones who was the strategist. And the more stories that we can tell that tell stories of us using our brains and strategy, I think the more we fill in the history that has always been there, but that needs to be retold. So the art was very important to me. The other thing we wanted to do was layer the artistic elements. So there's poetry, there's music, and I will say National Geographic was really open to, you saw we had the handwriting of the songs to make sure that you don't miss a word, but also it had to be beautiful. I didn't just want a lower third, I wanted beauty. It's a cinematic experience. And because some of the material is so emotionally difficult, you need to balance that with some beauty, with some things that you can stay with, and enjoy. And yes, I said enjoy a movie about the massacres. And I think that it is enjoyable cinematic experience. We can hold both things. We can hold art and pain, and art is usually a reflection of pain or a way to understand it. So thank you for that.
Thank you so much. It was really remarkably done. I felt the layers. I experienced a full range of emotion, and I just really appreciate the attention to detail in that storytelling and making it beautiful. It's really a stunning work. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hey, Rhonda. Hi, Dawn. I want to kind of go back to Nancy. Like for me, I was in Tulsa over the weekend, the Memorial Day weekend. And so, watching all of the docs again hits different when you walk down the street and so forth. But when we talk about the question of reparations, and in Tulsa, it was absolutely the community spaces I went into, there was no disagreement on that. But you have people for decades now, like the list of items, like this is in Mary E. Jones Parrish's book, those lists. And so what does it say about a nation when you have people who the last, 3 known survivors are like 107, 106, 100, and people are still reluctant to give them reparations? When you have the preponderance of evidence when you have people who have literally been fighting this fight for a long time with like heightened efforts in the 1990s? What does it say when, in the face of all of this, justice is still denied?
I think it says that for too many people, Black people are second-class citizens and not deserving of full rights and recognition. And I think it's as simple as that. And until those reparations are paid, that's the message that we are sending. So I think it's very cut and dry. I think it is a slap in the face, and it says we do not believe that you are fully deserving of all the rights of an American citizen. And until those are paid, that is the message that I will take from it.
You have nothing. Well, I will ask, like, what do you think that you bring to it, you know, as a Black woman telling the story and as an attorney?
I'm glad you raised the lawyer part. I think the lawyer part, I have a high tolerance for boring things. So I can page through the boring stuff with the best of them. And that's where, you know, you need a certain amount of patience. I also am, I think one of the strengths that over the 10 years that I've been doing documentary work, what I've gotten better at is understanding the team that I need to work with me. So I need, you know, I work on different projects at the same time. So I have an editor, white Jewish man, who was obsessed with this story. He would not let a frame drop of this story. He put his soul into this story. When I was like, something was good enough, he was like, no, it's not good enough. And that was such a beautiful experience for both of us. And I think, you know, to Karen's point, you see it in the movie. You see the love in the movie of people who were determined, because we were all stunned by this story too. So imagine being where you are now, just taking this all in. That's the experience that we had. And then we had to figure out how we were gonna do justice to it. Also, we did it in a really short period of time. I mean, National Geographic came to me in June of last year. So, you know, we had to like get a team together, go film. So a lot of that was instinct and just saying, where's the heart? And that's why I got to Deneen. And I was like, she's my heart. She's not just arm's length from this story. Her people are in it. Like, she was not going anywhere during pandemic, and she went to those digs. I didn't ask her to do that. I would never ask somebody to go on a shoot during that. She said, I have to be there. She literally said, I have to be there. So I think the lawyer part like helped me to get the right people in place and organize this effort, because it took an organized effort. And then I think the Black woman part of me made sure that these people we would talk about their lives, not just their deaths. There's too many stories about Black people that focus on the worst time of their lives. And I was resolutely determined as much as I could to give them life. And that's how we honor them. So I think those are two of the things. And then the third thing is, you know, kind of selfish, is I kind of need, in this period, I kind of needed this story. I needed to hear truth. I needed to see people who fought back and who overcame something so horrific because of pandemic, because of police violence, because George Floyd is dead, because Breonna Taylor is dead. I just kind of needed this place to put my grief. And so here I was like, I can pour it into this and, you know, do the best I can with what time and resources we have. So.
Well, thank you. Another stellar job.
Thank you.
Don, I have a question. How is the recent verdict in the Bruce Beach situation in Manhattan Beach? How do you think that's going to influence the situation in Tulsa, as well as in other similar incidents across the country? I had
keep
to ask,
hoping for the
particularly with your
best.
legal background, I figured you would add an extra element of what of how this could eventually really change things, not only for the descendants, the victims, but also for the whole conversation around reparations to us in general.
You know, I think that we're starting to see some people who are like, nah, this just ain't right. And that's, you know, a testament to you get decisions, you get those legal battles take a long time. People have no idea it can take a decade or more. And so that goes to, you know, Rhonda's point about, or my answer to Rhonda about like lawyers can take, we are stubborn and can like hang in there for a long time. And then I have seen so many lawyers, you know, get up, dust themselves off, and go back at it again. But I think the thing that we have learned now, particularly with the Supreme Court, is once upon a time in the age of Thurgood Marshall, you wanted to get to the court because we had the greatest advocate. So Thurgood Marshall is the winningest advocate before the Supreme Court ever. Full stop, ever. Did anybody know that? No, because we don't talk about that. He was a solicitor general. He had something like 56-2. He might have even been undefeated as solicitor general. That President Johnson appointed Thurgood Marshall solicitor general because he wanted him to be this effective advocate so that when his confirmation came up, no one could say he wasn't qualified. He was the lawyer for the United States and he won every case. So Johnson strategically did that. And Marshall originally he didn't want to do that job. And Johnson said, let me take you through this process so that when your confirmation comes up, ain't nobody say anything. And but Marshall's confirmation was the first contested confirmation. And there's a really great story about how he gets appointed to the court. So a long way of saying that we have to change as Black people, we have to change our orientation today. We have a 6-3 National Supreme Court that is, Brett Kavanaugh is a swing voter. Like, let that sink in. The conservative justice is our middle. The court is firmly to the right. There's not a lot of hope that we are going to get justice on voting rights, reproductive rights, immigration rights, or lesbian gay rights out of this Supreme Court. And so what does that mean? You can't just throw up your hands and not challenge wrongs. So we as a Black people we're at an inflection point. We are going to have to figure out other ways to make progress. And that's probably going to come through the Justice Department, through local state governments that are not corrupt, through local state cases where we can make some progress. We can't count on the Supreme Court anymore. And that's going to take a big mindset adjustment. Usually we're trying to march to the court because if we just got there, things would be okay. And that's not the case anymore. And that's a big thing.
It just never ends. Thank you so much, Don, for your time today and also for making this wonderful movie. On behalf of the world's largest group of Black film critics, thank you for watching this edition of AAFCA Roundtables. Have a great day.
Thank you so much.